Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And this is going to be one of those live streams. Going to wait another 10 to 15 seconds. And what I'm going to talk about is the difference and why there are organizations like Black Lives Matter and why you continue to see the protests and the unrest in this country. And if you saw the Justine Diamond and the 3/5 human law. And obviously by now, everybody, hey, Eric Christopher 91, it's good to see you as well. How's everything? It's been a while. It's good to see you. Appreciate it. Now, obviously, as I mentioned before, everybody in the world knows who Breonna Taylor is, but I don't know if everybody is familiar with one Justine Diamond. And what happened to her actually happened 4 years ago. And I'm going to go to PolitiFact when talking about this. And then after that, I will bring up the 3/5 human law and see how everything ties in. Just a moment. Now, this is by Clara O'Rourke, and this was done actually 5 days ago. Since Kentucky's attorney, he fits into this, Mr. Cameron, announced on September 23rd that the officers who shot and killed Breonna Taylor would not face criminal charges in her death, the grief over what some people consider a miscarriage of justice has manifested in more protests in Louisville and around the country. The reaction spilled over online in the form of social media posts comparing Ms. Justine Diamond. This is why 12 million is a slap in the face, begins one Facebook post, referring to how much money the city of Louisville agreed to pay Taylor's family in a wrongful death lawsuit concerning her killing. Meet Justine Diamond, the post says, misspelling Damon's name. In fact, I thought it was Diamond as well. It's Damon. Damond, excuse me. She is an Australian American who was gunned down by a Minneapolis police officer who was black as she approached a squad car. Of Ms. Damond was awarded a $55 million and one of Taylor, who obviously is black. Two women killed wrongly by these sworn to protect, the post continues, but a $40 million gap in how their lives are valued. But all lives matter, right? Just not the same apparent work as we speak. This post was flagged as a part of Facebook's efforts to combat false news and misinformation on its newsfeed. We wanted to lay out the details in the two cases, which are not identical. The post is also not entirely accurate. Well, let me stop right there, and I have to wholeheartedly disagree with PolitiFact. Now, I understand that they might not be identical, but they are definitely similar. Similar in the fact that both of these ladies were killed and should not have been shot, period. But the fact of the matter is, one life was valued not only more than the other, but her killer got to see justice, whereas Breonna Taylor's killers are still free, and 5 out of the 6. See, people also leave out the fact that there were 6 cops at the scene and not just 3. And not just one person fired. 3 people fired. They leave that part out. Here's what we know about Damond's death. On July 15th, 2017, Justine Rusnik Damond called Minneapolis police to report a possible assault in the alley behind their home, according to the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. Minneapolis police officers Mohammed Noor and Matthew Harity responded to the call but found nothing suspicious at the scene. They were getting ready to leave when they saw Demond outside the police car. Harity, who was in the driver's seat, said he was, quote unquote, spooked and drew his gun, unquote. Noor reached across from the passenger seat and shot Demond out the driver's side window. On March 20th, 2018, 8 months after Demond's death, Noor, who is black, was booked in jail on charges of third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter. The county attorney said he had behaved recklessly and that an investigation uncovered no evidence Noor encountered, appreciated, investigated, or confirmed the threat that justified the decision to use deadly force. On May 1st, 2019, Noor was found guilty of third-degree murder and manslaughter. Notice how, remember, there were 2 cops at the scene. Now, I understand only one shot, but you see nothing happened to the other police officer, Matthew Harity. A few days later, the city of Minneapolis agreed to pay a record $20 million to Demond's family to settle the wrongful death lawsuit in her killing. That's less than for violating Demond's constitutional city of Louisville, which was $12 million. In June, Noor was sentenced to 12 and a half years in prison. As the Star-Tribune reported, the case drew international attention and raised questions about the role of race and gender in the prosecution of officer-involved shootings. Noor is black and born in Somalia, and Demond was white and born in Australia. By comparison, the 3 officers who fired their weapons after barreling into Breonna Taylor's home with a search warrant on March 13th are white. Remember, that search warrant was a no-knock warrant. The 2 officers who shot Taylor 6 times were not charged and were not fired. According to the New York Times, prosecutors said they were justified in their use of force because they had identified themselves as police and Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, shot at them first. Walker has says that he and Taylor didn't know who was at the door. And they did not, first off, they did not identify themselves as police officers. These one witness, the so-called witness that they had, recanted their story. They changed their story about 3 or 4 times. On September 23rd, 6 months after Taylor's death, the 3rd officer, Brent Hankison, was charged with reckless endangerment for firing into a neighboring apartment. The Attorney General said none of the rounds he fired hit Taylor. He was terminated from the police department in June. The warrant for Taylor's apartment, signed by a local magistrate, was one of several in a case involving Taylor's ex-boyfriend, who police believe was running a drug trafficking syndicate. The New York Times has published a long story detailing Taylor's life and how she wound up in the middle of a drug raid on the night of her death. Now keep in mind, once again, she had no criminal record and was never the target of the police investigation, but it did not stop these bloodthirsty cops from killing her. And let's also keep in mind of the fact, and I just cannot let this go, that Brent Hankison was never charged for the murder of Breonna Taylor. Please, that is so important. He was charged with reckless endangerment for firing into a neighboring apartment. In fact, they didn't even refer to Breonna Taylor by name. That's how little her life mattered to the Attorney General and to the city of Louisville, Kentucky. That is an absolute disgrace. But this brings me to the 3/5 of a man law, or 3/5 of a human law. And the reason that I bring this up is because in the United States Constitution, it still has us listed as 3/5 of a human. And as you can see, we are still treated as such in the eyes of the law. All you have to do is look at George Floyd, look at Breonna Taylor, and several other instances where our people have been gunned down by race soldiers in the streets. Now, let me break that down, what the 3/5 law actually said. And it is known as the 3/5 compromise. Just a moment. Now, this is according to Wikipedia. The 3/5 compromise was a compromise reached among state delegates during the 1787 United States Constitutional Convention. Whether, and if so, how slaves would be counted when determining a state's total population for legislative representation and taxing purposes was important, as this population number would then be used to determine the number of seats that the state would have in the United States House of Representatives for the next 10 years. The compromise solution was to count 3 out of every 5 slaves as people for this purpose. Its effect was to give the southern states a third more seats in Congress and a third more electoral votes than if slaves had been ignored, but fewer than if slaves and free people had been counted equally. So way back when in the Constitution, we were never looked at as free people, and we were never looked at as people, period. We were looked at as 3/5 of a human. And as you can see, that still goes on today. And then you wonder why there is a Black Lives Matter movement. Then you wonder why there is unrest in America's streets. But meanwhile, we're told to get over it. But as you can see, when you look at the 3/5 of a human law and you look at what is happening to our people, we are still feeling and disturbing effects of slavery and not dealing with the race issue in this country. And until that gets dealt with, you will continue to see unrest in the streets and unrest in the country, period. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. I will be back later on after the presidential debate to discuss what happened between the orange face, aka Donald Trump, and Joe Biden. Thank you very much for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. Please like, share, and subscribe. UncClaude signing out. Take care, and God bless.